I'm 34 and have been driving trucks for over a decade. You get used to long, lonely nights on the road, but some nights stick with you forever. This happened just last winter, during a long haul through the Midwest. The roads were icy, but nothing I hadn't handled before. It was close to 2 a.m. when I pulled into a tiny rest stop off the highway. Just one of those roadside pull-offs with a couple of truck spaces and no real facilities. I had been driving for hours and needed to shut my eyes for a bit. I parked, shut off the engine, and reclined my seat. Snow drifted down in the glow of the highway lights and everything was quiet, eerily so. I wasn't out for long, maybe 20 minutes, before something jolted me awake. A sound, a soft tap on the glass. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes, and scanned the window. At first, I thought it was just the wind knocking some ice loose, but then I saw it. A figure standing just outside my driver's side door, partially hidden in the darkness. My heart rate spiked. The person wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. My truck was locked, but that didn't make me feel any safer. I reached for my phone, but before I could grab it, the figure pressed their face against the glass. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Their eyes, too wide, unblinking, stared straight at me. Their breath fogged up the window, and I could make out a strange, twitching smile on their face. My stomach turned. I don't scare easy, but something about this person wasn't right. Their head tilted in an unnatural way, and they slowly raised their hand, fingers tapping lightly against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I fumbled for my keys, heart hammering. The moment I started the engine, the figure backed away, melting into the shadows. I threw the truck into gear and peeled out of there, snow kicking up behind me. My headlights barely caught the figure standing at the edge of the trees as I sped back onto the highway. I drove for miles before I dared to slow down. My hands were still shaking. It wasn't until I stopped at another truck stop, this time a well-lit, busy one, that I realized something chilling. There was a single wet handprint on my window, but the shape of the fingers, they were too long to be human. It was supposed to be a simple drive home. I had just finished a late shift at work and was heading back around midnight. The highway was nearly empty, just miles of dark, open road stretching ahead. The only sounds were the hum of my engine and the occasional rustling of the wind against my car. Everything was normal, until I saw the car behind me. It appeared out of nowhere, headlights bright, following too closely. At first I assumed it was just some impatient driver, but as I changed lanes, so did they. Slowing down, they slowed down. Speeding up, they matched my pace. My fingers tightened around the wheel. This was no coincidence. Up ahead, I saw a gas station, a lone oasis of light in the darkness. I took the exit, hoping whoever was following me would keep driving. But as I turned, their headlights swung with me. I pulled into the gas station and parked under the bright lights near the pumps. The car behind me slowed but never pulled in. Instead, it coasted past, creeping along the road before disappearing around the bend. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe I was just being paranoid. As I filled my tank, I glanced around the lot. The station was empty, except for the cashier inside and a man sitting on a bench near the entrance. He wore a dark hoodie with the hood up, his head tilted downward. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, watching. I told myself to ignore him, but as I walked toward the store to pay, I caught my reflection in the glass doors, and I saw him standing up. I paid as quickly as I could, glancing outside every few seconds. The man was gone. I exhaled, relieved, and walked briskly back to my car. The station lights flickered as I unlocked the door, climbed in, and started the engine. But then, in the dim glow of the overhead light, I noticed something. The seatbelt in my back seat was buckled. I hadn't had anyone in my car all day. A deep, cold dread filled my chest. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached for my phone, trying not to move too quickly. Then, in my rearview mirror, a face. A man was sitting in my back seat. The hooded man. My breath caught in my throat. His face was obscured in the darkness, but I could see the slow, deliberate rise and fall of his chest. He was waiting. For what? I didn't want to find out. With every ounce of courage I had, I threw the car into drive and floored it. The tires screeched as I swerved wildly back onto the highway, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the back door swung open. I heard it slam against the wind, and when I glanced back, he was gone. I didn't stop driving, not for miles, not until I reached a well-lit parking lot near the city, surrounded by people. Only then did I check my car. The back seat was empty. The door was locked. No sign that anyone had ever been there, except for one thing. On the seat where he had been sitting lay an old, crumpled bus ticket. The date on it? From 3 years ago. Whoever or whatever had gotten into my car that night had never left the gas station at all. It was a long, empty road stretching through the dense, moonlit forest. The rain had stopped, but the pavement still glistened under my headlights. I was on my way home from a late shift, exhausted and barely keeping my eyes open. The drive was supposed to be peaceful, a quiet, lonely road cutting through the woods, nothing but the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind in the trees. Then I saw her. A woman standing by the roadside, dressed in a long, pale dress that clung to her body, damp and heavy. Her head hung low, strands of dark, wet hair covering her face. She stood unnaturally still, like a statue. My fingers tightened around the wheel as I passed her, my stomach knotting with unease. That should have been it. A strange sight, unsettling but explainable. Maybe a stranded traveler, maybe someone from a broken-down car. But when I glanced in my rearview mirror, she was gone. I shook my head, telling myself I must have been more tired than I realized. Maybe she had stepped back into the trees. Maybe I hadn't seen her clearly at all. I turned up the music, trying to shake the unease. The road stretched on, nothing but the sound of the tires against wet asphalt. The forest swallowed everything beyond the reach of my headlights, a yawning black void. And then, a mile down the road, she was there again, standing in the exact same position. I slammed on the brakes so hard the car skidded slightly. My pulse hammered in my ears. I hadn't seen any turnoffs. No houses, no driveways, no possible way she could have gotten ahead of me. This time she moved. Her head tilted up, her face still obscured by those dripping locks of hair. But I knew. She was looking right at me. A chill crawled up my spine. My breath felt heavy in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to hit the gas and get the hell out of there, but my hands refused to move. I couldn't look away. Then she took a step forward. That snapped me out of it. I floored the accelerator, the engine growling as my tires spun against the wet road before gripping. I sped past her, my hands white-knuckling the steering wheel. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't check the mirror. I didn't want to see if she was still there. But I wasn't alone. The moment I passed her, a freezing gust of air filled the car. My skin prickled, my breath came out in a cloud. The temperature had dropped instantly, impossibly. And then, a whisper. "Don't leave me behind." My body went rigid. The voice was right behind me, right in my ear. I forced myself to look in the mirror. She was in the back seat. Her hair was still wet, dripping onto the leather. Her face was pale, hollow. Sunken eyes locked onto mine through the glass, filled with something far worse than rage, emptiness. I screamed. Swerving, I nearly lost control of the car. My vision blurred as I blinked frantically, my mind spiraling into chaos. And then, she was gone. The air returned to normal. The temperature warmed. The seat behind me was empty, save for a few drops of water. I drove straight home, shaking, locking every door and window behind me. I barely slept, every creak of my house making me jolt awake. The next morning, I forced myself to check my car in the daylight, convincing myself it had all been a nightmare, a trick of exhaustion. But on the back seat, perfectly placed, was a single, sodden bus ticket. The date on it? 3 years ago. Whatever I had encountered that night, it hadn't just been a ghost. It had been waiting for someone to take it home. It was a winter night last year. Snow fell gently, blanketing the empty highway in a thick white layer. I was driving home after a long business trip, exhausted, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. Outside, the sky was pitch black, and the only thing cutting through the darkness was my headlights stretching down the lonely road. No other cars, no streetlights, just me and the hum of my engine. I had driven this road countless times before, but tonight something felt off. The radio crackled with news of an incoming snowstorm, advising travelers to find shelter. I pressed down on the gas, eager to make it home before the weather got any worse. That's when I saw him. A man standing on the side of the road. He wore a long black coat, his head lowered, hands buried deep in his pockets. He didn't wave for help. He didn't move. He just stood there, completely motionless. I drove past him, feeling a strange chill creep up my spine. But I told myself it was nothing, just a stranded traveler, maybe waiting for a ride. Until I saw him again. Same posture, same coat, same spot, except I had been driving for miles. My heart pounded against my ribs. There was no way, no side roads, no paths through the snow, no possible way he could have gotten ahead of me. I gripped the wheel tighter, refusing to look in my rearview mirror. But then, I felt it. A breath of ice-cold air against the back of my neck. I swallowed hard, my knuckles turning white against the steering wheel. Don't look, don't look. But I couldn't help myself. I glanced at the mirror. He was in the back seat. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, lips curled into a thin, unnatural smile. His breath came out in a cold mist, fogging up the glass. The car started shaking. The wheel locked up as if something was holding it in place. I tried to steer, but the tires skidded on the icy road. And then, he spoke. I've been walking for so long. His voice was raspy, distant, like it had traveled across time just to reach me. I screamed, jerked the wheel. The car spun out of control, sliding off the highway and crashing into a snow-filled ditch. My head spun, my body trembling from the shock. But when I turned, he was gone. No trace of him, no footprints in the snow. Only the back door, slightly open. The next morning, when the rescue team pulled my car out, one of them gave me a strange look. "You were the only one in the car, right?" "Of course," I said, my voice hoarse. The man frowned, pointing to the back seat. "Then why is there melted snow, like someone was sitting there?"